Okay, so I always like to cut onions like my roommate in Japan, Gareth, taught me. He claims he learnt it from Martha Stewart on TV. But you have your peeled onion. Just going to get rid of a little bit of gunk from in here, where it's just not the freshest piece of onion. Okay, so you cut down vertically with lots of slices close to each other. You don't have to be very careful. So what this technique does, it gets you lots of small pieces of chopped onion without you really having to do very much chopping. And so you go around once with lines like this. You don't have to be very precise or careful. You roll it over, hold it tight, and then just slice off the ends. So this gives you really small, tight pieces of onion without having to be good at chopping, which is pretty essential for me. Otherwise my onion chunks are very big. And it's not so bad if you put bigger onion chunks in the steak bake, but in general you want the gravy, which is what the meat and the vegetables are all going to ultimately become, is the gravy in the middle of the steak bake. You really don't want there to be a big chunky texture in a steak bake. That'd be more like a Cornish pasty or something. So you can see how fast that was. You can see how small the bits of onion come out. It's an extremely easy, fast way of getting onions the way you want them. So I'm just going to throw this straight in the pan and get it heating up until it's translucent while I cut the beef. Okay, so I'm doing this with sirloin. It was on special. In general, steak bakes are typically done with pretty low quality meat, but I tend to do it with slightly higher quality meat just to make the flavor really pop. So what we're going to do is take these bits of steak, and again, I'm lazy, I don't like to do a lot of cutting, so I just stack them up and do the first cut with all the pieces of the pile. Now we're going to be cutting these pieces pretty small, and I probably let this fall apart a bit too quickly. If I'd kept it together, I could maybe do the second cut without it being so much work as it's going to be when I do it, but you'll see even so, it's going to be really quick. And again, that's not because it's not worth doing right, it's because I'm not very good at chopping, so shortcuts are extremely beneficial. So now you can just take all these little ones and cut it small. So we're aiming, if you're metric, we're aiming for kind of less than a centimeter cube. So a quarter of an inch cube maybe in imperial. I just leave bits of fat in. They're going to render a bit in the pan. They're going to add more flavor, and also again when they're in the gravy, in the steak bake, in the stew part, they're, as long as they're not too big, you can't like big chunks of fat in, but it's really just going to be part of the gravy that you won't even really notice. And it adds richness to the flavor. But, you know, if you want to make it lean, you can take out the fat. It's also handy when you're chopping the beef if you have a dog and you drop a little cube. You probably can't see her, but she's going to come in and save me from having to clean that up. So now they're all cut. Again, they're all pretty small, maybe half a centimeter cubed on average. So I'm just going to go put all this in with the onions. And always some salt and pepper. Okay, so now the carrot. I'm going to peel it first. I just usually peel directly into the trash. My camera's not going to show that, but I won't be long. Then we're going to wash it and cut it. Wash the peeled carrots. Get the tips off. Now that's where we're going to peel it. Again, I try and go with the least chopping possible. So what I'm going to do is make long sticks. That's hard with the carrot sometimes. And then down the middle into a few more sticks. And same with the beef. And you've got these things that allow you to cut it pretty small. And yeah, the carrot's fine, roughly the same size as the beef, maybe a bit smaller. It's easier to get the carrot smaller without doing that much work. So, you know, that's the carrots. I'm just going to throw it straight in, stir it in, and it's just the garlic and gravy. Okay, so I probably didn't say when the onions went in, there was probably a couple of tablespoons of vegetable oil in there. With the beef coming, you shouldn't need too much oil, but you know, the onions you don't want to burn. And again, the gravy is going to soak up the oil when we put that in, and so it's not going to feel greasy or oily unless you've got very rich meat, which you probably shouldn't be putting in a steak bake anyway. Okay, so I'm making a mess of the garlic off camera. Okay, I'm just going to take a couple of bits. You know, very unscientific. I cut the tips off. And then I peel directly into the trash. Again, I'm lazy. With the tips cut off, the peel usually comes off really fast just by squeezing it. Okay, but you can end up with it on your fingers, so I usually wash it all at once again. Just to make sure there's no peel left on there. I'll wipe the knife. Squash the garlic down. If you have a real garlic press or a rock or whatever you use, you can do that too. Again, I really like washing up, so using the same knife for everything has a lot of benefits. And then you just want, same as any time you make garlic, you just want small bits again, so the flavor infuses in the food, and you're not really left with any significant memory of the garlic through the texture or anything like that. And because it's a stew, you know, all the flavor will come out of the garlic into the sauce. It's not gonna be big chunks that you bite into or anything. Okay. That's basically the chopping. Now we're going to move over and work on the gravy. Okay, so we're going to work on the angle here. So you can see in the pan, we've got the onions, the beef, and the garlic. And it's all nicely cooking in. My pan's a little bit small. You know, if things jump out, that's okay. It's not quite cooked enough yet for the gravy, so we're going to keep cooking until the onions are more translucent. But yeah, you don't want the beef to get tough before you put the gravy in, so that's the one thing we're trying to really make sure we avoid. Okay, so we're going to use bouillon for the gravy. Sometimes I use the cubes powder. I use like lots of them, like 4 or 6 for a stew of this kind. This is a bit stronger, so I'm just going to use a couple of teaspoons of this. And we might add another one if it needs more. But you know, the bouillon really gives the base for the gravy. So we're going to need some water to put that in to create a gravy that goes in. I'm just going to use this jug. This jug is basically a cup of water, which makes it really easy. Stick it in the microwave. I'm going to put it in for 1.5 minutes so the water's super hot when I put the gravy in. Throw the bouillon in. And while I wait for that, I'm going to get the spoon and I'm going to get some secret ingredients. So pretty much all stews that I make, I use Worcester sauce. So it looks like it's called Worcestershire sauce. Worcestershire sauce. It's just called Worcester sauce because nobody could say it like it's spelled. And a few drops of this add a huge amount of flavor to the gravy. So this is kind of fundamental to actually having that real British gravy flavor as opposed to kind of a more traditional higher cuisine. But trust me, you'll like it this way. So most stews and gravies need a thickener of some kind. And it's always good to stir things whenever you're around. And a lot of people use cornstarch as the thickener or flour. The problem with cornstarch is it makes it very silky, which can actually be a pretty authentic kind of feel for a store-bought steak bake. But potato starch actually just gives it a texture much more in line with the type of food it is, kind of that meat and vegetables and pastry, a little bit of potato. So the potato flour or potato starch, whatever it says on the packet, wherever you're buying it, it really is a much better thickener. Okay, so I have my hot water, turning the temperature down. I've got my bouillon. So I'm just going to take 2 big teaspoons of this, put it in the cup of water. And I think that's probably about right for this pound of meat. And I've slightly overfilled the jug, so this might get messy. I'm not even sure if you can see the jug on the camera. I am going to move it, just move everything around a little. You can do this directly in the pan too, but I like to have the gravy consistency done first, because otherwise you get chunks of the bouillon in particular places, and it doesn't necessarily transfer the flavor fully through the whole thing. I definitely overfilled this, so I'm going to pour a little bit in and then stir some more. And hopefully you can see kind of that gravy going. Okay, now that's much better. I can stir properly. And when I show you the actual gravy, you can see it's sort of really dark brown. So, you know, beef has a lot of its own flavor, but adding extra beef flavor is really the name of the game. We want this to be a really strong, beefy stew. And in a lot of ways, you can actually do it. I'm not going to call it vegetarian, because I don't actually know what's in bouillon. But you can do it with very little meat and a lot of gravy if you want. But if you can see how rich that brown color is, that's adding a lot of flavor. You probably saw there a couple of chunks of bouillon that I hadn't stirred in very well. So like I said, you don't actually have to do it in a jug. It helps if you do it in a jug to get it even. And if you've missed a little bit at the end, and particularly if you use the cubes, you're almost always going to have little chunks. Just leaving a little bit not fully mixed isn't a problem. You just stir it in. It takes practically no time. Okay, promised you the Worcester sauce. So because it's going in pastry and the meat stew is really the core flavor, I'm going to put more than I would in usually. In a shepherd's pie or a steak pie, I would only usually put a couple, but I'm going to put like 5 drops of this. 1, 2, 3, that's a big one. 4, 5. And then again, make sure it's stirred in throughout the gravy. Okay. Now I'm going to leave this for a while before I put the thickener in, because I want to know kind of how much of the liquid is still there. And also taste a little, see if it needs more bouillon or more salt and pepper. So it should taste very salty because it's going in to a pastry. If you're not left with a strong like a really strong flavor on your mouth, you probably need a little bit more, either Worcester sauce or a bit more bouillon. This one is pretty strong. You guys saw how much I put in. A cup of water, 2 teaspoons of this, 5 big drops of this. Okay, so I'm just going to cover it. I'm going to leave it on a lowish heat, but I want it simmering so the flavors get into the meat for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to put the thickener in. So again, if you're on a gas stove, you can do this much more effectively. But I have to change the knob and then wait for a while and see what happens. That smells really starting to come together. So I'm going to do the last couple of minutes without a top on. Just reduce some of the liquid. Off a couple of seconds. Then we're just going to put 2 teaspoons, big heaped teaspoons of the potato starch in there. Okay, stop the timer. Okay, the bread. Oh, I guess I left the spoon in there from last time just to make it easy. So the brand of this I buy is very, very fine. So it makes it really easy. If you have a more clumpy or thicker brand of potato starch, you might want to put it through a sieve before you put it in. But yeah, I just sprinkle 1 heaped teaspoon first. Stir that in. And at first you don't really notice that it's adding any binding. It's actually going to take some cooking before you really notice it. You stir it until you can't see any white before you do the next teaspoon, because you want it even as much as possible. You almost certainly can't see on the camera if it's thicker or not yet, but it is a little now that it's all stirred in. And that will get more as time goes in. And then my second one. So you can actually get a similar effect by putting potato chunks into the gravy instead of potato starch, but that can really go wrong. So the flour approach is a little bit safer. Okay, so that's really starting to look more like a gravy now, thick. And hopefully that's now starting to be more apparent on the video, but I'm going to use a spoon just to kind of show how much thicker it is now. Before, I think you could see it was like a soup or consommé or something. Whereas now, if I pull that gravy off, you see it drips like a gravy, not like a soup. See? And it's good to taste it just to check. And again, you want a really strong flavor, much stronger than you'd ever want to eat yourself. Because once it's with the pastry, that really, you have to add the flavor to the whole pastry, not just the meat. So you can see, because I'm on my electric stove, that's still boiling away. It's reducing a lot, which is okay. It doesn't have to reduce this much. I've actually turned the stove off, so it is going to start cooling down. But again, because it's electric, when I put the lid on, it's going to keep the moisture in, but it's going to keep cooking as if the stove is on for probably another 5 minutes. And if I was on gas, I would cook it for another 5 minutes. Now it's got the thickener in with the top on. And then just leave it to cool. And I just cool it in the pan until the pan is cool, and then I put the whole pan in the fridge usually if I'm making the pasties the next day, the SteakBakes. Because there's really no need to create more washing up by putting it in another package if it's going to be used pretty soon anyway. Okay, this is cooking a bit too much, so I am actually going to move it off the hot electric burner and onto a different one, so it's not cooking so much anymore. And okay, I'm not going to have a video of me showing you putting a pan in a fridge, so that's it for this part. And then, you know, you won't notice any difference. It'll be tomorrow. We'll put this into the pastry to make the steak bake. Okay, so the mixture's all cooled down. We're going to put it in the pastry now. This is the pastry I'm using. You can use any kind of puff pastry, doesn't really matter. I've got a cooking sheet with parchment paper here. Here's the stew. You can see it's chilled. It's not coming out. That's important when we put it together. We've got some flour. So you want a lot of flour on your rolling board. You can do it straight on your counter, but I use this breadboard because it helps me get the size right. Okay, you've got your pastry package. This has been thawing. Pulled out of the freezer about 40 minutes ago. Yeah. Okay, so with this kind of sheet, it's a bit of a pain. The rolls are a bit better. These can break when you're pulling them apart, but we can use that to our advantage because each one of these sheets is going to be three steak bakes. So because this did break, I'm just going to split it in three now. I'm going to roll it. The puff pastry, when it comes out of the packet, it's a bit too thick for a steak bake. You want it probably about, not quite half as thin, but close. Got together. And again, I'm going to flour the roller. So basically I'm just going to start spreading them out. You can see some of them are still a bit hard from not being thawed enough. That'll happen pretty quickly. Hopefully you can see this one though is kind of widening pretty nicely. So these sheets are usually, if you take their width, that's usually about the right length. So you can see here I've rolled this out. It's not perfect in terms of rectangle, that's fine, it's not a big deal. But I'm going to make it a little bit more rectangular. And so you're aiming for like somewhere about 4 or 5 inches wide. And this is what, I don't know, it's whatever the width of the thing is, so I guess probably about 12 inches long. It's going to result in a roughly 6-inch by 4 and a bit inch steak bake. Got a spoon about this size. It's a dessert spoon, but it's a big dessert spoon. Basically 2 scoops. So you want it kind of centered. But it's going to sort itself out, so you don't have to be too careful. You just fold it over. You're going to pinch around the edges. If you've got a lot extra, you can fold it a bit. And again, the mixture in the middle is going to spread out and fill it anyway. So you want to pinch it all the way around. Okay, and you move that to the parchment paper on your baking tray. You just do this a number of times. These are still a bit hard, so let me pull the other one out. This one also is going to break. I guess these really haven't defrosted as much as they should have. Let's give it a go. So again, you're trying to thin out the pastry and get it wider. A little bit longer, but mostly wider if it's come out of the packet with the width about 12 inches. And this isn't working so well, so I'm going to pause. You're not going to notice, and then I'm going to carry on when they're defrosted a bit more. Okay, so you can see this one's defrosted. I've managed to roll it out again, get it to about 4 to 5 inches wide. You know, it doesn't have to be straight. You can see this one's nowhere close to straight. 2 decent sized spoons, but not more, because then it gets overfilled. It's hard to close. It's more like a pie, less like a steak bake. Fold it over. Really pinch. Pull it more into the camera. Really pinch the edges round. So you can fold over and pinch. You can see also the meat comes out the side sometimes. That's not an issue. Let me try and show you what I'm doing. Similarly, just pinching around the edges, so it doesn't look that great. It'll all come together when it bakes. You can hear my oven in the background. I've preheated to 425. And again, I'm just going around the whole edge, pinching. Meat is squirting out a little bit sometimes. Not a big deal. Just try and get in as much as you can. It can be a bit messy. And again, you've got a little package, like a pocket of pastry with 2 spoons of the stew inside. Okay, so you can see I didn't use all the beef. That's okay. Better to have beef left over that you can eat with something else than to have too much meat in the steak bakes, because it makes them fall apart and messy. Okay, move this stuff out of the way so you can stay on the camera. What we're going to do next, I'm going to wash my hands. We're going to cut some holes and we're going to baste some egg on there. My dog has decided now's the time to dance around my feet. So we're going to whisk an egg up. We're not going to end up using the whole egg. I'm just going to brush the top with the egg. Okay, so I'm just whisking up some egg in a cup. I need to go find my brush. Okay, I just have a cheap silicone brush. I'm going to take a little bit of egg and just brush it over each one. So it's important you do this to get the kind of good shine, and it helps seal the edges a little bit too, I think. But it's also important not to have too clumpy an amount of egg on here. You don't want it to have like an egg crust. It really is just a wash. Okay, so the last step is just to cut some shape holes in it. You're not cutting all the way through, you're really just marking it to give it a texture when it comes out. You can skip this if you want, but it does make them look nicer. And you can see I'm just using a table knife here. If you use a sharper knife, it's fine. And if it breaks all the way through, it's fine. But the aim isn't to, like some pies you break through so that the stuff can come out. That's not the point here. It's really just, it makes it look nice. So as soon as I've done this, I'm going to put them straight in the oven, which, like I said, I preheat to 425. Now, you can actually pause here, pause before the egg, and put them in the fridge or even freeze them for as long as you want. But like almost everything, it's good to have it fresh. I'm going to go put these in the oven now, and then the next time you see them will be when I'm pulling them out. Okay, so it's been 22, 23 minutes and they're ready. And pull them out. So then I'll change the angle of the camera so you can see them better. My son's making toad in the hole, and you can see the sausages cooking in there. If this turns into a series, I might make a toad in the hole also. So here they are. You can see they're kind of crispy and firm. These might have been better pulled out a little bit earlier, but you know, they're looking good. What you do now is you let them cool for 20 minutes or so. You can't eat them when they're this hot. It's like eating a Hot Pocket or a pizza. You get a pizza burn. But I'm going to pull it on a plate and cut one over so you can see what they look like inside. Okay, so I'm going to take this one. So you can see it's the size we cut them. It's pretty thin. And when you cut it open, depending on the pastry, it's more or less puffy. You can see inside, it's kind of like a pocket of meat in there. You can see why that would be very hot. So in 20 minutes, I'm going to eat it. But that's it for today. So thank you and enjoy.